Good evening and welcome. Tonight we are going to be reading some articles out of History Magazine. And as you can see by the title, these are Roman Empire themed. We're going to be reading this article about chariot racing, a day at the Circus Maximus. And then we're going to flash way ahead in history to the sack of Constantinople. If you're not super versed in your Roman history, Constantinople was the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, which became known as the Byzantine Empire because Constantinople was once known as Byzantium. So technically still the Roman Empire. These articles, though, were chosen by my channel members. I had other Roman articles that they could have picked. These were the ones they picked. These articles were chosen by Alex, Marta, All the Happy Squirrels, Amina, Alessia, Luna, and Bachi. Thank you so much for picking these articles. And if you watching this would like to also pick History Magazine articles in the future, you can click the join button right down there or click the very first link in the description box. My channel memberships are only 99 US cents per month. And you get all kinds of little perks. You get your name in every video. You get behind the scenes. You get exclusive videos. You get to watch every video before it goes live to the general public. There's all kinds of little perks for the lowest possible price I can set it for. I'd love to have you join if you would consider. But let's start with the Circus Maximus. Let's go in chronological order and read about chariot racing in the Roman Empire. Also, I'm probably going to mispronounce some words. I'm so sorry. Just correct me kindly in the comments and I'll remember that and go forward with correct pronunciations. Trying my best. According to Livy, Rome's Circus Maximus, the hippodrome nestled between the Palatine and Aventine hills. Speaking of pronunciation, is it Aventine or Aventine? I think it depends on where you live. It's pronounced a certain way, but anyway, between those hills was the site of the mythical R-word of the Sabine women, a tragic event in Rome's founding legend. If I don't censor that word at the start of the video, they're gonna restrict this video, so that's just YouTube. The newly established, predominantly male state was facing a demographic crisis. After having his requests of intermarriage rejected, Romulus, Rome's mythical founder, invited the Sabine people to the Consuelia, a festival for the harvest god. Romulus distracted his audience with a dramatic chariot race that would allow the Romans to abduct the young Sabine women. Although there is no evidence to support Livy's account, we know the valley had been used for races and other spectacles for many years when King Tarquin the Elder first began to develop the stands of the Circus Maximus in the 6th century BCE. This hairpin racetrack would, after successive expansions, become the largest structure in the entire Roman Empire. According to ancient sources, at its peak, its stands could accommodate an audience of 250,000 spectators, a quarter of the city's population. The vast arena provided a venue for all kinds of spectacles, from athletic races and pugilitis, or boxing. I'm going to mess up my Latin, I'm so sorry. Boxing. To staged military combat and battle reenactments, gladiator fights, and even wild beast hunts. But what really drew the crowds was chariot racing. Games were put on in the circus to coincide with particular religious festivals or under the sponsorship of a patrician, a member of Rome's elite ruling class, eager to boost his popularity. In the 1st century BCE, there were 17 circus days in Rome each year, a figure that, by the 4th century CE, had risen to 66. The norm, at least from the middle of the 1st century CE, was for 24 chariot races to be held on each circus day. The charioteers, or aurigae, usually enslaved people or freedmen, and the chariots themselves belonged to the so-called factiones, professional teams hired by the event organizers. Each faction was managed by a senior charioteer called a dominus factionis, and employed a specialized staff in charge of selecting and caring for the horses, building the chariots, and assisting the competitors during the races. The teams were distinguished by their colors. At first there were only two, red and white. Then under Augustus, a blue team was added, and later a green one too. The inaugural parade. The spectacle began with an opening procession called a pompa circensis, circensis, at Capitoline Hill, which then crossed the Forum along Via Sacra and turned toward the Forum Boarium, or cattle market, by the Circus Maximus. It was an impressive, noisy, colorful march, with members of the nobility and the state authorities participating alongside the charioteers, accompanied by musicians, perfume carriers, and statues of various divinities. Each of the factions would display their colorful emblems. The Circus Maximus's track measured between 1,800 and 1,900 feet long and around 250 feet wide. In other circuses in the provinces, the tracks tended to be much smaller. Sand was placed over compacted earth to form the surface of the arena. Running down the central section, a low dividing wall, some 1,100 feet long, was known as the spina, or backbone. It was flanked by small ponds, shrines, and statues of gods, as well as an obelisk brought from Egypt after its conquest by Emperor Augustus. In the 4th century, a larger obelisk was erected. At either end of the spina were the metae, each composed of 3 cones, sometimes gilded in bronze and used to mark the turning points and the finish line. Victory belonged to the charioteer who took the final turn. The 4-horse favorite. Several types of chariots were used for racing. Bigas were pulled by 2 horses and trigas by 3. Occasionally, chariots might be pulled by up to 10 horses. That's too many horses. But without doubt, the crowd's favorite competition was that of the quadrigae, pulled by 4 horses. These horses were selected for their appearance and strength. And it was important to harness them in the correct order for maximum speed. The 2 middle horses were attached to the shaft of the chariot, and the 2 on the outside were attached simply by a strap. The horse running on the side facing the spina had to be the strongest and fastest to hold, lead, and steer. The single-axle carriages were small, weighing only 55 to 65 pounds. The front portion of the wooden frame was covered in leather, and small wheels minimized the risk of flipping over. Some races had 2 or 3 chariots in each of the factions, which meant there could be up to 12 chariots on the track at a time. But the races that most stirred the crowds were those with only one chariot per team. The races were generally run over 7 laps and lasted only 8 to 9 minutes, with 10 or 12 races held per day. Caligula doubled that number, putting on 24 races a day during the games at the end of his reign. A rousing start. Before the race, the chariots and horses were enclosed in the carceres, starting boxes with gates opening onto the track. A team's station was decided by lot. Balls in the team's colors were drawn out of a kind of drum, and the faction whose color came out first would choose its starting position, lending it an advantage. The highest authorities in Rome, including the emperor, would watch the spectacle comfortably seated in a tribune called the pulvinar, which afforded a magnificent view of the action. The editor, the spectacle's sponsor, used a box above the carceres. He was the one who started each race by dropping the mappa, a white cloth, to the ground. As the mappa fell, a 4-foot-long trumpet-like instrument called a tuba was sounded simultaneously, a signal to the public and the competitors that the race was starting. A mechanism immediately released the doors of the carceres, and the chariots burst forth into the race. In his epic poem, Punica, Silius Italicus describes a chariot race that took place in Hispania. Even before the starting gate was unbarred, the excited crowd surged to and fro with a noise like the sound of the sea, and, with a fury of partisanship, fixed their eyes on the doors behind which the racers were standing. And now the signal was given, and the bolts flew back with a noise. Scarcely had the first hoof flashed into full view when a wild storm of shouting rose up to heaven. Bending forward like the drivers, each man gazed at the chariot he favored, and at the same time shouted to the flying horses. The charioteers tried to keep close to the spina in order to minimize the distance covered, although this made maneuvering the turn at each end of the track more difficult. Many tried to stay in first position throughout the race, but others preferred to wait until the later laps, or even the final straight, before making a sprint to victory. I went to a Kentucky Derby party this year. I've never done that before. I've never watched the Kentucky Derby, but this year, this horse was in last place the whole race, and then in the final straight, the last stretch, it zoomed to the front and it won. It was crazy to watch. It was great. As dust kicked up during the race, it could cause the charioteer to become disoriented. A member of his team on horseback, the hortator, would serve as a guide and shout out the position of his opponents. Other team members, the sparsores, ran onto the track to throw refreshing water over the horses. Rex. You guys have seen what was it? Ben-Hur. You know the Rex. It's wild. That's a great, one of the best scenes in movie history, the chariot race in Ben-Hur. Amazing. But anyway, horrendous and sometimes fatal accidents, or naufragia, or shipwrecks, as the Romans called them, happened regularly during chariot races. The most dangerous moment for a charioteer was either overtaking another chariot or making the tight turn at the ends of the spina. Given the speed of the vehicles, which was over 45 miles per hour on the straights and at least 15 to 20 miles per hour on the turns, the charioteers ran a serious physical risk. For protection, each charioteer wore a metal helmet and kept a dagger tucked into his girdle that he could use if he needed to cut the reins tied around his waist. That move would allow him to avoid being dragged along the ground by his horses and potentially trampled by the other competitors' horses. The excitement reached a fever pitch when the winner crossed the finish line in front of the judges' stand. The tuba sounded again to announce the victory. The charioteer was then presented with a palm and a laurel wreath as a symbol of his triumph, as well as a cash prize. Finally, he made a victory lap of honor around the spina to receive the adulation of the crowd. The public would take advantage of this interval to relax, eat, or chat with companions, waiting for the next show to begin, whether athletics, a wild beast hunt, or another exhilarating chariot race. Speaking of, they should do another movie, like just a whole movie about chariot races and the teams and the rivalries and all that. I think that would be a good movie. It'd be like a race car movie, but with chariots. Anyway, let's read about the thrill of the race. An exceptional mosaic was first discovered in 1938 in Akaki, on the island of Cyprus, but not thoroughly excavated until the 2010s. Dating to the first half of the 4th century, it decorated the floor of a room in a large Roman villa and depicts various stages of a chariot race in the circus or hippodrome. Chariot racing was the island's favorite sport, as it was throughout the Roman Empire. This mosaic's central panel, measuring 36 feet long by 13 feet wide, is one of only 9 found within the empire depicting a chariot race. In terms of its size and preservation, it's comparable to mosaics with the same theme found in Sicily, Lyon, Madrid, and Barcelona. The Akaki mosaic is detailed and precise in its depiction of the circus, showing the elongated track with its central spina right here. Can you see? There's the spina there with all the columns in it, the water and all that. A water channel embellished with small monuments, and even the lap counter decorated with ova, which means eggs. You can see right here. Counts the laps. At one end of the finish line over here, with 3 cones placed atop a platform. At one end is the finish line with 3 cones placed on top of a platform. The chariots or quadrigae are depicted in a highly realistic style. Even the emblems of each team can be seen on the charioteers' clothing. Next to the chariots, we see the hortatores. Number four, right here. There he is. Can you see? There you go. Riding his horse there. Riders who shouted instructions to the charioteers, and the sparsor, who refreshed the horses with water. Tossing water on those horses. The complete panel of the mosaic, of which a little more than 2/3 is visible here, and the rest is quite deteriorated, depicts a race with 4 chariots, one from each faction. The ancient Greek inscriptions include 2 names for each quadriga, one for the charioteers, which are Damasos, Polyphemus, Cosmion, and Protogenes, and one for the leading mares, Telonike, Linneo, Pegasus, and Thalanto. Good horse names. The winning charioteer in this competition was Protogenes, who, like his competitors, is depicted in several moments, from race, there he is, to victory. Dun-dun-dun. When he receives the coveted palm, can you see in his hand there? Dun-dun-dun. He's got a big, I hope you can see with the horrible glare. He's got a palm leaf in his hand there. This is an applique decoration with a 2-horse racing chariot. This is the Louvre in Paris. Then over here you can see them excavating the mosaic here. That's what it looks like. Looks like this part is right. No, this part is right here. It's this part. Yeah, because then you can see the guy throwing water right there. That's so neat. What a cool picture of what it looks like in real life, and then a nice big detailed photographs here. Speaking of mosaics, look at this big old mosaic. It's gorgeous. The winner of the race from the red faction holds the victory palm. This is from the 3rd century CE, and this is located in the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid. Now, ages ago, we read a whole history magazine article about this for a Halloween issue, but it was literally years ago. But I thought of this when I was reading this article, and then they mention it. Sorcery and skullduggery. Fans of chariot racing were highly invested in their chosen team. Many placed bets on the winning chariot, with gambling being an integral part of the experience. Some resorted to the black arts in a bid to jinx the rival teams. Archaeologists have found curse tablets made of lead sheets that call on wandering spirits to unleash misfortune on the opposing factions. Rolled or folded, pierced with a nail, and left in the crevices of tombs or in the circus itself, waiting for the spirits to do their dirty work. Even charioteers themselves were suspected of witchcraft. According to historian Ammianus Marcellinus, one was condemned for having his son trained in black magic. Another competitor was accused of practicing sorcery and burned at the stake. See, put that in the chariot race movie. I need to write a screenplay. But here's one of the curse tablets. It's a lead sheet called a lamella. It's inscribed with a curse and fixed with 2 nails. This looks like, I don't know, maybe that's the nail. I can't really tell. But yeah, they were literally throwing curses on each other. They were hiring Etsy witches. Pretty much, right? Each charioteer wore the horse's reins tied around his waist, a practice that increased the risk of being dragged along in an accident. You can see right there. This guy's yelling out to this horse. This is a beautiful painting. These horses' faces, my goodness, it's detailed like crazy. This is the chariot race by Alexander von Wagner, it says. We're going to see another one of his paintings in a few pages. I guess he really loved chariot races. There's another mosaic found in 1806 representing a chariot race. This is at the Lugdunum Museum and Roman Theaters in Lyon, France. You can see the spina there and the columns. Are they around? Looks like there's a crash here. There's a guy about to throw some water on these horses over here as they make their way around. That's pretty cool. I think that's an airplane outside. You hear that? I can't tell if it's a really loud car, like an engine running somewhere, or an airplane. Oh, I think it's passing anyway. Let's continue. The Circus Maximus. The Circus Maximus, reconstructed here as it would have been in its heyday, served as a model for circuses in other cities across the Roman Empire. 6th century writer Cassiodorus conjectured about the possible meaning of its design. He thought the track symbolized the earth, and the water-filled moat of the spina represented the sea. The obelisks decorating the spina represented the great stars. The 12 carceres, or starting gates, he thought were linked to the signs of the zodiac or months of the year. The chariots made 7 laps around the track in a counterclockwise direction, echoing the 7 days of the week. And the 4 teams, red, white, blue, and green, represented the seasons of the year. And they went counterclockwise, so they'd go this way. Why was that so hard to figure out for a second? wild, you think? I guess that makes sense because then they finish right in front here, in front of the box, right? But let's look at all the little details here. This is the carceres or starting gates right here. It says there were 12 carceres arranged on both sides of the main access door to the circus. Here, participants mounted their chariots and waited for the race to start. Here are some towers on either side. The ends of the Great Gallery were framed by 2 tall side towers, evoking a fortress-like structure. It is likely that each tower was crowned with a bronze sculpture of the quadriga. The arena, a word we still use today, covered with packed sand, the arena was wide enough to accommodate up to 12 chariots at the same time, and the competitors would do a maximum of 7 laps around it. The cavea number 4. Oh, the crown over here. With the cavea, or stands made of wood or stone, the public brought cushions to be more comfortable. Unlike the theater and amphitheater settings in the circus, men and women sat together. Number 5, right here, the pulvinar. There we go. Try to avoid the glare. This tribune or box built by Augustus was reserved for the emperor and his guests. It was connected to the imperial palace on Palatine Hill. Oh, that's convenient. Then the spina, right here. You can see the obelisks and everything. The long double wall ran down the center of the arena. It was decorated with bronze dolphins and sculpted eggs used for counting laps. Also shrines and 2 obelisks taken from Egypt. The Porta Pompei is right here. The inaugural parade of the gamers entered the circus through this main gate. The box sitting just above the Porta Pompei was reserved for the editor, the spectacle's sponsor. Then the mite right here, little columns there. Cones, initially made of wood and later of gilded bronze, were placed on a base at each end of the spina as turning posts. And then over here is the Porta Triumphalis. In the central part of the curved side of the cavea stood a large gate, the Porta Triumphalis, through which the winning charioteer would leave the circus. Here's a closer look at the starting gates here, the carceres. They are the 12 starting boxes, 3 for each team, where the chariots were placed before the race. To ensure a fair start, they were closed off by double doors that opened the moment the editor started the race by dropping a white cloth or mappa from his tribune, located on the Porta Pompei. The row of carceres was arranged in a curve to minimize the advantage that any one chariot would have when entering the first straight. So here's the mechanism that ensured all of the 12 doors opened at the same time. Just like real horse racing today, I suppose. Here's what it looks like today. So that's something. It says the shape of the stands and central spine are still visible at the Circus Maximus site today. The tower in the foreground dates to medieval times. This was not there when chariot races were being ran here. That's really incredible. Now this box is really cool. A track record of a star charioteer. Charioteers enjoyed celebrity status, as did some horses. An inscription on the tombstone of Diocles, a famous charioteer of his time, gives the details of his life as recorded by his fans, who erected the stone. Although the original stone has been lost, several copies have been preserved. The inscription explains that Diocles was born in a Roman province in Hispania, on today's Iberian Peninsula, in the year 104, and that he competed from the age of 18 until his retirement at 42. Other champions like Scorpus weren't lucky enough to survive until retirement. Over the years, he represented 3 of Rome's 4 factions and amassed a phenomenal track record, participating in 4,257 races with 1,462 victories, and placing second 861 times and third 576 times. His total prize money amounted to more than 35 million sesterces, which is around $800 million in today's money. That's so wild. It's wild that they kept stats that detailed, that he was like transferred to different teams, and I'm sure that was a huge scandal amongst the fans, you know. I wonder if he had brand deals. I don't know. But this says this is one of the mosaics in a Roman villa in Casale in Sicily's Piazza Armerina, including a depiction of chariot racing. And then down here is a glass beaker decorated with a chariot race. You see the little horses there. And this is from the Roman Circus in Colchester. Here's another cool mosaic showing off the 4 different factions here. This is at the National Roman Museum in Rome. Wow. So we have Factio Prasina, the green faction. I guess this just shows what the horses are wearing and what the riders are wearing. Their little helmets are cute. The Facto Rusata, or the red faction. Factio Albata, the white faction, and Factio Veneta, the blue faction. It's good little horses there. Cute. Here's another one of those cool chariot paintings by, what was his name? Alexander von Wagner. This is in the Manchester Art Gallery. See all the spectators going crazy. Bless you, Jetson, for my feet. And then this is a terracotta fragment showing a charioteer mid-race, and the dolphin sculptures used to mark laps being lowered. See that in Ben-Hur too. This is at the Louvre in Paris. And let's see, it's obviously a chariot race, but what is this? It's a relief. That's all it says. And you can see the big race happening down here. It's pretty busy, isn't it? This is at the Archaeological Museum of Colfiorito. Yeah. And then down here is a terracotta oil lamp. The chariot race happening there. Very cool. I think it's such an interesting topic that they had like intense sports in the way we do today with like soccer/football and American football. Like each team had to vote fans. When there were wins or losses, there would be riots and such, just like we do today. All right, let's fast forward in history, way forward, and head over to Constantinople, which is right there. Today's Istanbul, of course. Let's read about the sack of Constantinople. The King's Crusade, better known as the Third Crusade, was a tactical win for conquering key cities, but failed in its primary goal, to reclaim Jerusalem for Christians. It had, however, succeeded in securing a truce with Sultan Saladin, allowing Christians free access to Jerusalem. But nonetheless, the Holy City, conquered by Saladin in 1187, remained in Muslim hands. By 1198, Pope Innocent III called for the Fourth Crusade to reclaim Jerusalem. In November 1199, Count Theobald III of Champagne, a powerful noble and feudal magnate, organized a tournament in the town of Ecry-sur-Aisne, today's Asfeld, in northeastern France, inspired by folk of Neuilly, preachings throughout the region and the call to take up the cross, a group of nobles in Ecri, led by Theobald, decided to start a new crusade to win back Jerusalem. Among them were three prominent figures: Geoffrey of Villehardouin, who later wrote one of the main accounts of this campaign, which would in time become known as the Fourth Crusade; Boniface of Montferrat, who would assume the leadership of the Crusaders after the premature death of Theobald in 1201, and Simon de Montfort, who would play an important role in the later Albigensian crusade against the Cathars, which we also read a history magazine article about. From crusaders to mercenaries. Reaching Jerusalem by land in this era was unthinkable because the Balkans, under Byzantine rule, was far too unstable. The Crusaders considered sailing to Egypt and then marching overland to the Holy Land from there, but they lacked the resources for ships and supplies and sought help from the prosperous trading republics of Genoa and Venice. Although old and blind by this stage, the wily Venetian doge Enrico Dandolo made a deal with the Crusaders in 1201 to transport their men, horses, and supplies to Egypt in exchange for 85,000 silver marks. But by the time the Crusaders were due to embark, they had failed to collect the sum, and the venture hung in the balance until a new deal could be reached. Under pressure to pay up, the Crusaders decided to alter their planned route and head first for the Dalmatian city of Zara, which is today Zadar in Croatia. A commercial rival of Venice in the Adriatic, Zara was part of the Catholic Kingdom of Hungary. There's Jet scratching under the desk now. A commercial rival of Venice in the Adriatic, Zara is part of the Catholic Kingdom of Hungary. The Crusaders' new plan was to conquer the wealthy city and hand it over to Venice to settle their debt. Doge Dandolo had long been keen to control the Dalmatian coast, which would give him power over the thriving trade that flowed across the Adriatic. With the Crusaders in his debt, Dandolo saw the perfect opportunity to use them to exploit their potential and gain Zara for Venice. In November 1202, the Crusaders attacked the Catholic Zara, the first time a crusade had targeted a Christian community. Pope Innocent III was furious and swiftly excommunicated the entire expedition. Shortly afterward, he withdrew the excommunication from all except the Phoenicians, whom he blamed for the outrage. The episode at Zara may have foreshadowed what would then happen in April 1204 in Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. When the Fourth Crusade began, Byzantium was in chaos. Years earlier, Byzantine Emperor Isaac II had been blinded and imprisoned by his brother Alexius, who then seized the imperial throne to become Alexius III. Isaac's son, also named Alexius, called on the Crusaders for help. At Zara, he offered them 200,000 silver marks, as well as troops and supplies, if they would support him against Alexius III. He also made a promise that the entire Byzantine Empire would offer obedience to the Pope in Rome. The Crusaders accepted the deal, and the Fourth Crusade changed tack again. Apart from a handful of French knights who continued toward the Holy Land for the original mission, the majority of the Fourth Crusade headed for the Byzantine capital of Constantinople. The Crusaders arrived in Constantinople at the end of June 1203, taking Isaac's son Alexius, the would-be emperor, with them. The capital made a profound impression on them. As Geoffrey of Villehardouin writes, they never thought there could be in all the world so rich a city, and they marked the high walls and strong towers that enclosed it round about, and the rich palaces and mighty churches, of which there were so many that no one would have believed it who had not seen it with his eyes, and the height and the length of that city, which above all others was sovereign. No man there was of such hardihood, but his flesh trembled. In July, the Crusaders besieged and attacked the magnificent city. The Venetians managed to breach the walls, and Alexius III fled in terror. In early August 1203, they crowned Alexius IV as co-emperor alongside his father Isaac II. Victorious assault. A few months later, in February 1204, Alexius Ducas, the son-in-law of deposed Emperor Alexius III, succeeded in imprisoning Alexius IV and taking the imperial throne as Alexius V. It's a lot of Alexiuses. Alexius V, nicknamed Mortzuflus for his bushy brows. Alexius V had already stirred up opposition to Westerners in general, and railed against Alexius IV for the debts he incurred to the Crusaders and their pact to bring the Orthodox Empire under the control of Catholic Rome. Now, with Alexius IV imprisoned by Alexius V, the Crusaders were left weak and without the funds they had been counting on. It's one battle after another, isn't it? All they're trying to do is get to Jerusalem. My goodness. It just gets worse and worse. They began to have supply problems too, as Alexius V closed the markets of Constantinople to the Crusaders. Alexius V organized an army to attack their forces. The Patriarch of Constantinople accompanied the emperor's troops, carrying with him an icon of the Virgin Mary and other revered relics. Although the surprise attack shook the Crusaders at first, they recovered, attacked the Patriarch, and seized the sacred relics from him. Alexius V and his men were thrown into disarray and fled, abandoning the imperial standard, which, together with the loss of the relics, was a tremendous humiliation. In his eyewitness account, French knight and chronicler Robert of Clary describes the impact on the Byzantine troops. They have so great faith in this icon that they fully believe that no one who carries it in battle can be defeated, and we believe that it was because Mortzuflus, or Alexius V, had no right to carry it that he was defeated. The incident left Alexius humiliated in front of his own people. After various unsuccessful attacks, he tried to negotiate with Dandolo, the wily Venetian doge, but could not reach a deal. War now seemed inevitable. Alexius still felt threatened by the young Alexius IV, whom he'd usurped and imprisoned, but who had the support of the Crusaders. So Alexius V had Alexius IV assassinated, at which point chaos engulfed Constantinople. With Alexius IV's death, the Crusaders had lost their only Byzantine ally, as well as the funds he'd promised them. They're just trying to get to Jerusalem. They're just trying to pay back the Venetians. They saw no choice but to take the city by force, and in early April 1204, they prepared to storm the mighty walls of Constantinople. The Venetians armed and garrisoned their ships for the attack by sea, equipping them with petraries, or stone-slinging siege engines, say that 10 times fast, and covering them with skins soaked in vinegar to prevent them from catching fire. Atop the masts, they installed flying bridges to help the soldiers reach the top of the city walls. The French Crusaders focused on the land offensive, preparing their own war engines and amassing the tools and weapons needed for sappers, or combat engineers, to open a breach in the ground defenses. On the other side of the wall, the Byzantine armies were also preparing to fight. They reinforced their defenses and installed war machines and wooden towers on top of the city's stone towers to gain height and firepower. The Western forces had already agreed that if the attack was successful, they would gather all the booty in one place and distribute it from there. The Venetians would receive 3/4, and the French would get what was left. In this way, the Crusaders planned to settle their debts with Venice. They had also decided how they would go about appointing a Western emperor to rule the Byzantine Empire. He would be elected by 6 Venetians and 6 Frenchmen. The attack began in the early hours of April 9th, and at first the Byzantines managed to repel their assailants. But fortunes changed on April 12th. A sudden favorable wind enabled one of the Crusaders' double ships, 2 ships conjoined to increase range and power, to maneuver into position next to a tower in the city wall, which they began to attack. Meanwhile, the ship of Lord Peter of Amiens moved into position alongside another tower. Peter set his men to work on one of its side gates, which was walled up with bricks. They managed to open a small breach, large enough for only one person to squeeze through at a time. The defenders launched a rain of projectiles against the Crusaders, stones, boiled fish, and incendiary devices. According to Robert of Clary, it was his own brother, a clerk called Aliomes of Clary, who, fired up with religious zeal and undaunted by the danger, squeezed through the hole first, sword in hand. The defenders, shocked at this miraculous breach, fled in terror, followed by Alexius V, who escaped in a fishing boat, but was later captured by Crusaders and killed. The Constantinople elite quickly elected a new emperor, but he also fled. Then, in a last-ditch attempt to prevent their city from being sacked, a delegation of church officials went to offer the surrender of the city. The Crusaders accepted, but sacked the city anyway. They want the treasure. Onslaught and vengeance. Villehardouin relays what happened after the Crusaders entered the city. Then followed a scene of massacre and pillage. On every hand the Greeks were cut down. So great was the number of killed and wounded that no man could count them. Before the conquest, the Crusaders had sworn not to kill, R-word, or loot churches, but from April 13th, these pledges were disregarded. The Crusader chroniclers omitted the mayhem, but the Byzantine historian Nicetas Chronates did not hold back. The Crusaders were nefarious men, acting as precursors of Antichrist, authors and heralds of his nefarious deeds, which we momentarily expect. The richly endowed churches became a key target for the looters. Nicholas Messarites, another Byzantine chronicler, describes the plunder of war-maddened swordsmen breathing murder, ironclad and spear-bearing, sword-bearers and lance-bearers, bowmen, horsemen, boasting dreadfully, baying like Cerberus and breathing like Charon, pillaging the holy places, trampling on divine things. I think it's Chiron. Anyway, running riot over holy things, casting down to the floor the holy images on walls or on parcels of Christ and his holy mother, and the holy men who from eternity have been pleasing to the Lord God. The looting went on for days, accompanied by M-word, R-word, and kidnappings for ransom. As Messarites recounts, lamentation, moan, and woe were everywhere. They slaughtered the newborn, killed prudent matrons, stripped elder women, and outraged old ladies. They tortured the monks. They hit them with their fists and kicked their bellies, thrashing and rending their revered bodies with whips. Mortal blood was spilled on the holy altars, and on each, in place of the Lamb of God sacrificed for the salvation of the universe, many were dragged like sheep and beheaded. The Hagia Sophia was plundered, stripped of ornaments, liturgical objects, altars, precious vestments, and anything made of silver or gold. Another sacred building voraciously sacked was the Monastery of Christ Pantocrator in the center of the city, where treasures from surrounding monasteries had been brought in a bid to keep them safe from the Crusaders. Western bishops and clerics joined in the plundering and later took back treasures and relics to their dioceses. The Crusaders had already agreed to bring all the spoils to one church in the city, and having amassed it all there, they were astonished at the haul. Robert of Clary wrote, "Not since the world was made was there ever seen or won so great a treasure, or so noble, or so rich, not in the time of Alexander, nor in the time of Charlemagne, nor before, nor after." The Venetians collected their 150,000 marks from what had been promised by Alexius IV, and the French leaders took 50,000. There was a need to appoint a new emperor, preferably one of the leaders from the crusade. The supportive Enrico d'Antolo tipped the balance in favor of the Count of Flanders, who in May was crowned Emperor Baldwin I. The Latin Empire of Constantinople was born and would last until 1261. What a story, right? So let's look at some of the treasures they collected. Venetian booty. St. Mark's Basilica in Venice houses many religious artifacts that the Venetians seized during the sacking of Constantinople and the plundering of the Byzantine churches. Some were kept as is, others were supplemented with new artwork. But a non-religious piece is perhaps the most famous, the 4 gilded bronze horses made in antiquity that adorned the Hippodrome of Constantinople. 4 chariot horses. It all ties back together. Each horse measures 7.5 feet high, over 8 feet long, and weighs almost a ton. The Venetians had to cut off their heads in order to transport them by ship, and then weld them together again on arrival. Collars were added to hide the joint marks. Why did they take these? They're so heavy, and they're just big old horses. I guess they were just taking whatever. It says the horses of St. Mark's. This set of 4 gilded bronze horses graced the loggia above the main entrance of St. Mark's until 1970, when they were replaced with reproductions in order to preserve the originals, now on view inside the basilica. What is my cat? She's doing that crazy thing. She literally only does this when I'm reading History Magazine. She crawls into one of my drawers and just like digs around and goes brrr. Why does she do that? She's so crazy. If she gets too loud, I'll pause and move her. Let's see what else we've got. Grotto of the Virgin, Venetian-style silver gilt of Mary, set in a rock crystal carved by Byzantine craftsmen, and with the crown of a Byzantine emperor, perhaps Leo VI, as a base. Wow. That's really beautiful. This big gold thing here is the Palladoro, the altar retable in St. Mark's. The 7 upper enamels were added after being looted from the monastery of Christ Pantocrator. I hope I'm saying that right. Over here is the reliquary of the True Cross. Interior, the richest set of enamels seized during the sack of 1204. Look how beautiful this is. Cup made of carved turquoise with stylized animals and set with gold and semi-precious stones. It's beautiful. Here is St. Michael the Archangel standing in front of Paradise. This is an icon in gold cloisonné with precious stones. Look, this is my favorite, besides the horses. The horses are great. Silver censer, used for burning incense in the shape of a church crowned with Byzantine domes. I'm guessing it's one of those things that you see them like when they're walking down the aisles, like all the pews, swinging the big incense. I'm pretty sure that's what a censer is. And this one looks like a little church. It's so cute. That's so cool. This is Madonna Nicopeia, meaning bringer of victory, Byzantine icon of the Virgin and Child. An altar is dedicated to her at St. Mark's. And then the main part of this chalice is made of sardonyx. Its silver gilt base is set with precious gems. That's gorgeous. And that's just a little bit of what they claimed, right? Here's another blood relic, it says. A jasper, gold, and enamel reliquary said to contain the blood of Christ. Brought to Venice after the sack, it remains a relic in St. Mark's Basilica. Here's the Doge of Vengeance. It says, as dukes, Latin for duke, or dux, Latin for duke, or doge, Enrico Dandolo, the elderly head of the Venetian Republic from 1192, was the city's most powerful leader and nursed a deep hatred toward the Byzantines. In 1171, after hearing reports that Venetians living in Constantinople were being mistreated, he and the then Doge, Vitaly II, hold on. You guys, the cats turned on the TV in the other room. I thought, if you heard little noises, I thought it was the neighbors being a little loud. The cats turned on the TV in the other room. Oh my gosh. How they did that, I don't know. They ran over the remote somehow. Anyway, that spooked me when I realized that there's like noises in the living room. Oh my gosh. Anyway, back to this blind, nasty man. That the Venetians in Constantinople were being mistreated. He and the then Doge, Vitaly II, Michiel, mounted a punitive expedition against the city. The following year, Dandolo returned to Constantinople as part of a diplomatic mission with the Venetian ambassador. His later blindness was attributed by some sources to mistreatment by the Byzantines. Dandolo's resentment toward them, both for the alleged personal injury and for the suffering endured by his compatriots, explains his role in the Fourth Crusade. Dandolo died in 1205 at age 98, possibly from wounds sustained during the crusade. There's a painting of him here by Domenico Tintoretto, and this is located at the Chamber of the Great Council in the Doge's Palace in Venice. That makes sense. Here, of course, is the Hagia Sophia. Very recognizable interior here. One of the most beautiful religious buildings in the world. And there's the Great Dome. The Great Basilica. Hagia Sophia, the spiritual center of Constantinople, was mercilessly looted by the Crusaders. Built as a church in 537, it became a mosque in 1453. After the Ottoman conquest, it served as a museum from 1934 to 2020, when it was once again consecrated as a mosque. Gorgeous. Someday I'll get to see it in person. It's so beautiful. So here's a big old map of Constantinople as it was back in 1204. Let's see what this says. Until the Fourth Crusade, no army had breached the mighty walls protecting Constantinople. This illustration shows the two Crusader assaults on the city, both in the Golden Horn area and the estuary separating the main city from the Galata district. Galata? I don't know. This part of the city's defenses was most vulnerable due to the Byzantines' reliance on a defensive iron chain stretching between Galata and Constantinople, which prevented enemy ships from entering the Bosporus Strait. I think that's right here. Yeah, the big chain there. In July 1203, when the Crusaders first attacked Galata, the force managed to break the chain, opening the estuary to their fleet. By this time, the Byzantine navy was practically non-existent, reduced to about 20 half-rotten ships, making it much easier for the Crusaders to reach the imperial palace of Blachernay. I think after initial attacks by both land and sea, the force launched its final assault in April 1204 by sea alone, leading to the city's catastrophic fall. I guess a fail as well. My goodness. So let's see. I'm still spooked about the TV suddenly being it scared me so much. All right, July 6th, 1203. Number one is up here. Okay. My brother-in-law just walked into the room, not realizing I was filming. The scream I scrimped. He scared me so bad. Oh my gosh, I'm so on edge now after the TV incident, which he said he did not turn on the TV. It was totally the cats. And then that, my heart's racing. Anyway, we are going to finish this before anything else happens that spooks me. All right, let's see. July 6th, 1203. The Crusaders seized the Galata Tower, forcing their way through an open gate while counterattacking Byzantine troops. They break the defensive chain blocking access to the Golden Horn. On July 7th, the Crusader fleet sails into the Golden Horn and disables the last remnants of the Byzantine navy, which is right here, number 2. They're sailing. They've broken this. They're sailing in. On July 11th, 1203, the French Crusaders crossed the Golden Horn by the Blachernay Bridge and set up a camp in front of the Blachernay Palace. That is way up here. The Blachernay Bridge. It looks like they're invading by land and by sea. Right? They're going over the bridge. There's the Blachernay Palace right there. On July 17th, Venetian ships assault the city by sea. The Crusaders seized 25 towers and set fire to buildings ahead of them to prevent the Byzantines from approaching. And that is right here. Boom, boom, boom. And then, on July 17th, as well, on land, Byzantine Emperor Alexius III retreats ahead of the Crusaders and flees by night. The battle ends with the recognition of Alexius IV as co-emperor alongside his father Isaac II. Their reign would prove to be very short-lived. So that is right there at the palace. Then, on April 12th, 1204, the big day. After their first assault on April 9th is repelled, the Crusaders launch a second attack at the walls along the Golden Horn. One Venetian ship lowers its flying bridge onto a tower, allowing it to be stormed, while troops from another vessel break down the gate of a second tower. Through these breaches, forces enter the city, then ruled by Alexius V, and surrenders the following day. And that is this attack here, going in the second wave. Pew, pew, pew. Reminds me of when I did the history maps, battles of history map by map, something like that, when I would with the arrows. But I abandoned that project because I realized eventually I'd be getting into more modern wars, and there's certain wars like the 6-Day War. I can't make that relaxing. I just can't. There's no way. Even if I'm going D-Day, I can't make that relaxing. So I abandoned that. I'm sorry. I know you guys liked it. I'm sorry. There's a point where, mercy. The chronicler Gunther of Paris, who was sympathetic to the Crusaders, attempted to cast their taking of Constantinople in 1204 as both heroic and merciful. Crush cowards, shout in thundering voice, brandish iron, but spare the blood, instill terror, yet remember they are brothers. Well, they didn't do that, apparently. His account contradicted the detailed Byzantine chronicles of the butchery and betrays the anxiety Christians felt over an attack on fellow believers. So there's a painting here by Eugène Delacroix showing the entry of the Crusaders. Looks like the people are like kneeling down. Interesting. Really nice painting, but I doubt it was that glamorous, huh? This is the head of John the Baptist. Goodness. Preserved in the Cathedral of Amiens, this relic was brought to France by Wallon de Sarton, a member of the Fourth Crusade. The tray dates from 1876. Sarton sold the original silver one. Goodness. There's apparently just John the Baptist's head. Imagine coming home from crusade with the head. But anyway, here's a big depiction of the wall in Constantinople. Give you an idea what these guys are up against. That's at the Blancherney Palace, it says. Here are the flying bridges you can see here. Flying onto the towers, right? Domenico Tintoretto painted frescoes of the flying bridges used by the Venetians to assault Constantinople in the Doge's Palace in Venice. Each makeshift walkway, made of 2 beams joined with planks, was attached to the top of the ship's mast. The bridges were around 100 feet long, equipped with handrails and lined with leather and canvas. They were an effective, if precarious, way for soldiers to reach the battlements atop the city walls. This looks more like what it probably looked like. Not glamorous at all, unless you're this guy. This guy's having the best day of his life. Everyone else is fighting like it's so busy. It's so chaotic, isn't it? I'm climbing the walls here and attacking at the top. Very treacherous. This is also a really beautiful painting here. Actually, it's an engraving, it says. A 19th century engraving shows Mort Soufflus on horseback, proposing in vain a peace deal with Enrico Dandolo, who stands at the stern of a Venetian ship. Wow. Here is a depiction of the surrender of Zara. These dudes are, look at all these people in white lined up. I guess they're presenting like all of their, the keys to the city by the looks of it. They're big old keys. The 17th century work by Domenico Tintoretto, another Tintoretto, as he painted it also on the chamber of the Great Council, the Doge's Palace in Venice. I guess that's all his work. Interesting. They're like, do we want these keys? And he's like, yeah, we're going to take the keys. Yeah, totally. And he's like, hand them over. And look at this. This is a 1213 mosaic of Alexius, later Alexius IV, asking the Pope for help. Twice Crusader. Oh, that's Simon de Montfort, who was a very interesting character in history. This is just like a footnote in his activities interfering. He pretty much changed all of Western Europe. Refusing to attack Christian cities, Simon de Montfort continued to the Holy Land. His piety earned him command of the Albigensian Crusade in 1209. Look at this French collection. Following the sack of Constantinople, King Louis IX of France purchased relics of the Passion, or items believed to have been used in Christ's crucifixion, from the new Latin Emperor Baldwin II. Among them was the crown of thorns, whose thorns had been split off as relics over the centuries. To house the crown, Louis built the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. The relic was moved in 1806 to Notre Dame, where it still resides, having survived the 2019 fire. So it's inside this ring here. If you look really close, you can see all of the little sticks and such inside. Now, do you think this really was the crown of thorns? Like, why? Because at the time, it was a little bit inconsequential. Who would have saved this? Who would have thought to save it, right? I don't know. I don't know. Like all like the spear that pierced his side and all that. Who saved that? How do you know that's the spear? I'm not going to question it. It says the goal of the Crusades was to reclaim the Holy Land, but politics paralyzed the Fourth Crusade when its troops sacked Constantinople, and rightly so. And here's the Pope that, in a sense, caused all this. So let's see. Oh, that's a map of all the Crusades. All the Crusades. So let's see. First Crusade, 1095 to 1099. Where does it start? I guess in Cologne. You know what? I'm not even going to bother tracing. There's way too much happening here. But we can see that this one started here at Dartmouth and went all the way around here. I guess up here too. Oh, I guess this section went by land. Down there. Wild. There's a lot happening here. We're not going to go through all that. And then lastly, we have a 15th century miniature from a chronicle by David Aubert showing the Crusaders arriving by sea for an assault on the walls of Constantinople. And this is in the Arsenal Library in Paris. Wow. I like the other painting better. This looks very organized, and I doubt it was. But anyway, that is it for tonight. My goodness, my heart is still pounding. Anyway, I'm gonna go relax now. I'm gonna go watch some ASMR and calm down after getting spooked twice in a row. But I do hope that you found this video to be relaxing and calming, not spooky at all. And if you want to be the one that picks future articles, because like I said, I had other Roman articles that just aren't getting read because the channel members didn't pick them. But if you want to be the one to pick the articles, you can become a channel member by clicking the join button right down there. It's near the subscribe button. Or you can click the first link in the description box down below. Thank you again to my channel members who picked these articles. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good